is an administrator and what are the different roles and responsibilities of an administrator. And if you're interested in becoming an administrator, so what are the key skill sets that we recommend that you focus on. So really the life of an administrator goes something like this. You're getting asked questions right out of left and right field. Things like, we just hired somebody, where's my project? I can't find something on my timesheet. Can you write a report for me? I locked myself out of the system. Why can't I fix something? Why do I have to contact so-and-so person? I don't have the right permission sets. Do you have any documentation? And then, with it being end of year, some of you may hear the last statement that popped up, which is, well, we're reorging. So we're going to change all the departments and all the managers and all the job codes and all that kind of stuff. And if you're in a PSA solution, that structure may drive a lot of things like approval workflows and reporting controls in the system and organization of data. So really an administrator can get asked any of these questions, and they're all valid because PSA solutions tend to get involved in all of these different areas: projects, invoices, timesheets, expenses, management, reporting, metrics, all that kind of stuff. So you are really in the throes of things on a day-to-day basis. So I've broken it down into, you have to wear many hats, and some of those hats are things like a customer support rep, because you're the person that people are sending emails to and questions to, and you're having to respond and help them understand or fix things in the system. You're also the customer service desk, because then people make the request of, hey, can you change my permissions? Can you write this report for me? Can you, pull this data for this metrics? So you're in the help desk role by the nature of being the administrator. But you also may be the data administrator, which is you might be the person that's responsible for setting up the data, like putting new users in the system or creating projects. And that in itself it's a data entry position, but you have to know when to put data in and what fields are applicable and how to set those fields. And of course, you are also probably the system administrator, so you're responsible for making changes to the system, turning on features and functionality, maybe changing some page layouts, maybe setting up data views and workflows and things like that in your environment. And so really all of these together come back to a general category I like to call the general use and reference user for your PSA or for OpenAir, and that is also known as guru. So you become the guru of the system. Administrator is probably too minimal of a term. You are really the guru of the system because you're the go-to person for everyone to talk to. So as we look at each of the hats, if we look at what each of these hats actually does, that sort of drives what skills you'll need in the system or in the environment that you're working in. So really, the customer support rep hat, the one that you're getting all the questions and you're coming up with the answers or you're providing the guidance, this really is the most important role of the whole PSA solution because it drives system adoption. If people can't get quick answers, they either won't do something that would help their, help their life or help the company, or they'll do something incorrectly, and now we're having a data problem, data accuracy, mistrust of the system. So this really is a key role for any organization that has a PSA and they want to put somebody in front of it. That person is really driving the adoption, and in order to get that adoption and that trust of the system, you have to be very responsive to the questions and acknowledge the fact that you've got something and try to find some kind of timely response, leveraging maybe other people, maybe the vendor support, maybe third-party organizations like ourselves that can really help you answer these questions quickly. But the kind of questions you get though, the questions can run the full gamut. They can be your basic question of, hey, I locked myself out, can you reset my password? To more complicated things like, hey, can you put together a weekly project report that does forecasting of a projection of current margin and projected margin at the end of the project, and let me know if it's going red or green. Those are all valid questions, and they obviously range in skill sets, capability, and knowledge in the PSA tool. Now, a lot of questions you'll get are handling access, like I can't see something, or I was told to find this, or try to do something like that. A lot of times when people ask, hey, I can't find something, it was because they were told to put time against a project, for example. That's a great example. I need to put time against this project, but I can't find it on my timesheet. That kind of request, that kind of access request, quite often is something that maybe there wasn't some scheduling data that was put in the system. So that kind of request is pretty common, and that one's pretty easy to handle and know that it's okay to go ahead and let them see it. But think of other requests where somebody says, hey, I need to be able to see everyone's utilization in the system. If you're not a manager of a team, you probably should not be allowed to see everyone's utilization in the system. And as an administrator, you have to be able to make that decision, not just take questions for granted, but understand the nature of the question and whether that request or that access is really something that should be granted to that person. This comes into a lot of play with things like subcontractors. When they're hired and they're put in the role of project managers, quite often project managers can see each other's projects. But if you're a subcontractor, are you allowed to see each other's projects? Because now you're exposing your customer list to a third party. So that maybe requires some kind of unique configuration for them. Also things like I need to be able to approve Wendy's timesheet. Well, if you're not the manager or you're not the project owner, why are you involved in the approval cycle unless you're like backing somebody up? So really, a lot of the times the ask of the resources to the administrator's response should really be a why. Like, help me understand why so that I understand first off if it's the right thing to do, and second off, how to make sure I make that configuration compliant with policies. So you really, as an administrator, you fall into this sort of help desk, help assistance, customer support role, and by that nature, you actually become the enforcer of your policies, your business operations. So you can also already see if knowing the technical aspects of the system may be one thing, but the should you do it is really understanding the business operations and policies, which is a key skill set in being a system administrator. If you're also responsible for typing the data in, of course you'll have to know how to put the information in, how to understand how to ask for more licenses from the vendor if you need that, how to maintain the data accuracy in the system. User licenses are an easy one to kind of point to because a lot of PSA systems have, you buy a number of licenses and those named users use the licenses, and so you have to understand how to manage license counts. But you also may delegate data entry to someone else. So you may have a business administrator or a project administrator entering in projects and customers. You may have somebody in IT or maybe in the HR organization that creates the users. If you delegate that kind of stuff, you still kind of become the general owner of the data as a data administrator, because you have to make sure that they know how to put that data in correctly. Make it easy through system features, but also be able to do data audits and make sure it's still compliant so the data is kept clean. And of course, if there's no typing in, but it's more of an interface, you become the person who's coordinating with IT. So you don't necessarily have to know all the details and exactly how the integration works, but you do need to be able to have some controls in place to know when data is being passed, and whether data being updated is impacted in some negative way, like there's errors or something coming through, so that you can support IT. And as a system administrator, you are in front of a lot of stuff related to the system. So things like release management, all vendor solutions have some kind of natural evolution where they put out new releases or new features of the product. So if you're in front of the solution, you can't just say, okay, well, it works today and I'm just going to keep it this way. You may fall very quickly behind some very efficient feature functionalities that would benefit you and the organization. So release management falls on your plate as a system administrator, along with enabling and rolling out new features and functionality in context of the business operations that they would support. Maybe things like rolling out a new resource scheduling feature that makes it easier to update weekly appointments or something like that. And unfortunately, you're also probably the person who it falls to make sure that you organize the data as the organization itself changes. So if there's reporting structures that change, maybe types of projects or offerings are rebranded, so now you have to update information so you can get metrics by each of the service lines or business lines or things like that. So it falls to you to sort of maintain the system as the company itself, as the business itself evolves. So that's where the system administrator hat comes in, not only keeping the system itself as something that's evolving going forward, but to keep it up to date and supporting the organization. And then, of course, finally, any integrations that you have with your PSA solution, and there's usually quite a few because PSA is one of those, I always think of it as sort of the center of the universe because HR tends to touch it, finance tends to touch it, sales tends to touch it. Expense AP may end up touching it. The ticketing system or customer support touches it. So all of those different systems could be talking to your PSA. So you have to be aware of the data that's coming in from other systems and also going out to other systems. So as you make changes to the system, you're keeping everyone in sync so that data flows and synchronizes between our platforms automatically. So all this comes back to the guru thing. So you're in front of data, you're in front of system configuration, you're in front of your end users. So really to help yourself, you really have to be in front of how do I get information in other people's hands. And that's where, as a system administrator, I like to encourage system administrators to build the training material that they would use to onboard individuals, do project manager training, end user training, and have that information available for reference for individuals. So if they have a question about how do I enter my timesheet, they should be able to find a user guide or some kind of video or some kind of help area that they can go to, FAQ that they could go to and find this information out. You do end up becoming the de facto person that also informs people about change. So, hey, next week we're going to go to semi-monthly timesheets instead of weekly timesheets. Here's how it impacts you. Here's what's going to happen. Here's how things are different. And you're the person proactively pushing this information out so that the end users are not surprised. Some PSA systems have like a chatter feed or some kind of instant messenger or messaging type system or some kind of message board. Use that where you can and encourage people to check that. Just like you would have probably as your company has an intranet site or something like that. Okay. But overall, all said and done, you do become the main contact for everything regarding your PSA. Questions, data entry, changes, evolution, problems with data, integration contacts. You become the guru of your PSA. So having said that, what kind of skill sets are really needed to be a PSA system administrator? Okay. Now, this is my opinion. I think the most important skill set for a PSA system administrator is to understand the company that you work with and the company that you work for, knowing what their business model is, what their company policies are, and what is the overall objective of having a PSA in the system. And you'll notice nowhere in this bullet list is there a knowledge of being able to write Java and be able to know coding and integration logic and certain platforms and software. I think it's more important to understand the business because a lot of what needs to happen to support a PSA solution is understanding why. Why does somebody need something? And the why is generally answered by process. why do project managers need to see each other's projects? Because they need to be able to run metrics or run global reports that give them the ability to see the performance and availability of maybe other PM's projects, but more importantly, how available other resources are that are working on other PM's projects. So I can't see everyone's true availability unless I can see all the projects in the system. Okay, so understanding the why, I think, is the most important skill set, and being plugged into executive objectives, company metrics, how everyone's doing their job, and how you can help them do your job better really is a big part of being a PSA administrator. Now, I'm not going to argue that you shouldn't have some technical capabilities, but if you're not technical, really what your role ends up being as a PSA administrator is to be that coordinator with the IT folks that may be supporting the platform. If you have a PSA solution like Financial Force, you may have IT resources that are on your Salesforce platform team supporting the technical components, the technical configuration of Financial Force. But you can still be the system administrator because you need to understand why do I need to add certain fields, and where do those fields need to be able to appear and repeat and support from a reporting perspective, because that's answering the business objective. I would also argue if you're not technical, you are still the person that should be doing things like testing. So if there are technical changes, integration changes, since you know what the objective is and you know what the requirements are and you know what the business process needs are, you should try being that tester of the change and making sure it's acceptable to meeting the objective, meeting the requirements of the end user, coordinating with others to do testing as well. So it falls to you to basically be very well versed in what it is the system is doing. You just don't necessarily need to know what kind of Apex code trigger is being used or coded into the system. You just need to know, here's how I need it to work, and here's what the end result should be. And being a tester in that role makes sure that you have full knowledge of what the expected behavior is. Okay. And I would also say, you don't have to be technical, but if you're not technical, you are still responsible for monitoring data. So making sure that data is being put in clean, data is adhering to compliance and policies, reports are accurate because we know the data is clean. So some of you that may be on this call that might be system administrators, depending on what kind of PSA solution you have, you may be the full administrator end-to-end because it doesn't require a lot of technical know-how and you know the system really well, and others of you are in front of a system that has a lot of technical requirements, like a Salesforce platform type, Force.com platform, where your role as a system administrator is more of the making sure it supports the business. And that's an equally valid system administrator role, because I'm going to go back to my first point. The biggest skill set you need to be a PSA administrator is understanding why you need the system and why you need things to work the way they do. Now, as a system administrator, there are things that you can do to make your life easy. And one of those things is to try to be proactive on data monitoring, catching a mistake before it becomes something that now we have 3 months worth of data to fix because the entire quarter's worth of time was tagged the wrong way. Making sure that you're monitoring license usage so that if you start understanding or finding out that you're going to bring on another subcontractor or bring on a whole outsourced staff or merging with another company, how many licenses are being used and how many will you have to expand? Are projects being set up correctly? Are they coming in from other systems correctly? And if they're missing data, how are we making sure that data is closed? So just simply looking at data is a big part of, I think, making people confident with the system, because sometimes it's not about the features, it's about the reporting that comes out of the system. And if they don't trust the numbers, it may not be the way that the numbers, it may not be the features related to the numbers, it's related to how the data was put in. Okay. And the other thing that will really help management is, as your administrator, is making sure that there's compliance to policies, like getting weekly timesheets in, getting expense receipts, becoming that person who's really, hammering home that timely information in the system is key, because that is how we're going to be able to meet the objectives of the system. As a system administrator myself, and helping a lot of customers in a help desk capacity over my lifetime, there are a number of things that I recommend PSA administrators put in place to help themselves. Something like, especially if you're a larger organization and you have multiple departments or multiple countries or multiple offices, being a central help desk person can be very helpful, but it also can be a bit overwhelming. So sort of delegating and creating that hierarchy where you have a central help desk, but then you have local contacts in front of each of the departments or each of the offices or each of the countries, so that there's a go-to person in each of those regions that might be on their same time zone, that might be in their same department or area to answer questions in the context of that business unit. So really it's focusing on not only who's the system administrator, but understanding if there's a team of people that should be called, some people call them super users or power users, that you can delegate some information to, so that you have more local contacts in place. Also, set up a calendar of what needs to happen when. A pretty common thing is at the end of the year, you have to make sure you put in the holidays for next year. And so that's something that you could probably start working on now if you haven't already done it, because people are already scheduling and planning stuff for next year in your PSA solution. And people will look like they're available to work on January 2nd, even though that's probably maybe a holiday in your organization. Set up reminders about changing things like accounting periods, or making sure that you update custom time ranges, because every quarter we have a new time range that we have to create. There is some configuration of the system that requires some regular maintenance. So if you set yourself up on an administrator calendar, that will just help you out in the long run to keep on top of things. And really find a place to put documentation and direct people to it, so you can have more of a self-service, self-help type area. Don't rely on the PSA tool to have the end-all be-all help center, because they're going to answer the questions that end users may have in terms of the technology and the product, not in terms of your business process. So if you did, when you first rolled out your PSA, if you have a bunch of training material, make that centrally available and point people to it. Keep it up to date as changes are made. Set up an FAQ site, make your own little knowledge center, so that people know where to go to look up common questions like, how do I change my password? And how do I schedule a report? Things like that. This will help people help themselves. And in the world of Google and people looking up answers really quick on the website, people are used to doing more self-service now. So having this kind of help desk documentation structure will benefit you in the long run. Okay. So there's all kinds of documentation you can go crazy with documentation, but really hit the highlights. What does a person need to do by role, right? What is finance responsible for? Explain things like how to do invoicing. Everyone needs to do timesheets. Create a module for timesheets. Focus on what people would be asking and setting up the help desk information in that way. And you could also do webcasts. Do short little videos like, here's how you schedule a report. Here's how you delete a timesheet. Here's how you create an expense report. Those are all things that people can just watch in like a minute and a half. Again, from social media, the whole YouTube phenomena has really made it something that people look for answers at a click of a button type thing. So your FAQ database, you're going to get, as an administrator and in front of a lot of the questions, you're going to get a lot of questions repeated. The number one is probably, how do I change my password? I locked myself out, right? The other one is, I can't see something in my timesheet. And the third one is, I can't find the right report. How do I get this data out? Okay, those are all probably three questions that you get no matter what PSA solution you have. Put them together in an FAQ database and make it available on like a central website or inside your OpenAir solution using like workspaces and stuff to be able to create sort of quick reference documents on the how-to. Because somebody with a question, there's probably three other people with a question that just haven't asked it. So that will be a very helpful thing for them to do self-service-wise. So really the bottom line here for best practices as a system administrator, don't think of a system administrator as someone that has to know everything about the system and be able to do everything in the platform. They really need to understand the business operations and the why. And it's more than just unlocking people that lock themselves out. You are a big part of the organization because you're helping make the PSA system hum, you're helping adoption, and if you're not doing the hands-on, you're coordinating with the people who are doing the hands-on. So make sure you spend some time setting up a help desk that will just cut down on the number of direct emails and questions that you're getting and let people help themselves to answers, and really just keep connected with the business as you continue forward and make your PSA solution a living part and a critical system within your organization. So as we come to the end here, just know that the PSA System Administrator is one of the first roles that gets identified whenever you bring your PSA on board. And it is also one of the last roles if you ever get off of a PSA system, because they're in the know of everything about your system. So you actually own the life cycle of the PSA that you have in-house. So definitely take it to heart and make the most of it to help that PSA solution support the business.